Joel Cano was arrested in New Mexico. Lucas, you're going to have to warm this one up for me because I didn't even catch this one. This one completely came out of the blue. It seems like we've got some kind of immigration something happening here, but this one you got to just help me understand what's happening here because it seems really important, but I'm not sure I fully understand what's going on here.
Okay, well, we've got a couple of different issues of note going on here, but I'll basically lay it out. Um, Maybe a week ago, I saw that this magistrate, and a magistrate is the position in government, the municipal magistrate in New Mexico. This man is in Las Cruces, New Mexico, for starters, a town maybe an hour north of El Paso, Texas, in southern New Mexico. So a magistrate in Las Cruces recently resigned, and he resigned his post over the quote unquote political bombshell that he had hired an illegal alien and also had an illegal alien living in the casita in his house. So what had happened, or what we know of so far, is that he had some home repairs, maybe landscaping. I'm not sure the details there. This is his wife, Nancy, by the way, on the screen, Nancy Cano, and they had hired three people who, at least one of them was an illegal alien, to do either home repairs or landscaping at their house in Las Cruces. At some point after they had met and gotten to know this person who had worked on their house, he was looking for a place to stay. They had a casita, and they either let him live in the casita in the back. And by the way, casita is a small house. So a lot of people have a mother-in-law cottage or a garage apartment in their home. That's what these people had here. So they allowed the illegal immigrant from Venezuela to stay at their home. So news of this breaks about a week ago. He resigns as the magistrate. I assume that the illegal alien was taken into custody by ICE, or by the Immigration Services, and I figured that this would sort of dissipate afterwards. There was a lot that was being made about his position as a judge and about the corruption of judges by Twitter. I think equating a municipal magistrate who looks at parking tickets and speeding tickets to be quite a stretch, to be comparing him to the district judges in the lawfare that's occurring against Trump, but that was sort of where the story was going. But then part of the narrative became that, oh, this immigrant was this illegal alien was a member of Tren de Aragua. So that's another very interesting aspect with regards to this, because I'm still rather dubious about what a threat Tren de Aragua is. And I'm more interested in the Venezuela nature and the United States relationship with Venezuela, with our interest in Venezuela oil and our actions with regards to trying to coup Nicolás Maduro, the leader of Venezuela, for the last several elections. And the United States State Department and secret agencies, our real deep state, has been very interested in doing so. So that all has come to a head here with this man, Joel Cano, and his wife, Nancy Cano, in Las Cruces, who have been arrested by immigration services. And ostensibly, the charge is tampering with evidence. So I don't know if you have any questions, or if that lays out the story broadly enough for you.
Maybe the backstory of what might really be going on here. So, Venezuela's got a lot of oil. Is this somehow related to America's interest in Venezuelan oil?
It's absolute. I mean, reading between the lines, it's 100% about American interest in Venezuelan oil, and it's also about American concerns going into the Gulf states and the Middle East and the instability there. So if we go back Nicolás Maduro is the successor of Hugo Chavez, and a lot of people might remember Hugo Chavez and his regime in Venezuela, a socialist regime. He came to power during baby Bush years, maybe shortly beforehand, but during baby Bush years, and he was very anti the war in Iraq. He was anti America in Libya. He nationalized the oil industry there, which had been previously under the control of Chevron. So the United States considers the American businesses' interests to be American interests, and has tried to bring back to power somebody who would, quote unquote, honor the agreement or honor the contract with Chevron and denationalize the oil interest of Venezuela. And so their claims have been that the governor, the leaders of Venezuela have been robbing the Venezuelan people, and maybe this is true, maybe this is not. But either way, the United States wants the Venezuelan oil reserves on the off chance that, say, Iran blows up the Strait of Hormuz, or attacks Saudi Arabia, or does anything else to disrupt oil coming from the Middle East, or maybe the OPEC nations join hands with Iran and Russia and China, and the United States is cut out of an area of the world in which we have long had a strategy of chaos in the region to maintain our control there, because that again seems to be having diminishing power for maintaining American interest in that region. So as the Trump administration and the Biden administration before him, and even the Obama administration before Biden, or Trump before and Biden and Obama before, we've had a long succession of American administrations who were very interested in overturning the leftist regime in Venezuela, and it has everything to do.
Everything that we're hearing about Tren de Aragua, this is the pretext of having some presence or some meddling in the affairs of Venezuela, with designs on reestablishing that ability to get oil from Venezuela as a backstop in case the Middle East situation spirals out of control and we're no longer able to have an easy pipeline of oil from the Middle East.
Okay, so the American responses. Let's look at how America responds and tries to coup regimes across the world. Well, we've put sanctions on Venezuela. Those sanctions on Venezuela have led to a harder life in Venezuela, and thus we had people who were fleeing Venezuela and coming to the United States. We also know that it's certainly in the handbook of the CIA and the State Department to fund organizations that destabilize governments. So why would we not expect them to do the same to us? I doubt they do the same to us. I've been very dubious about the claims against Tren de Aragua since I first heard of them. But going back to when Tren de Aragua comes on the radar, dial back to, say, July last year, before Butler, Pennsylvania, and the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. We had just seen for a couple of weeks this concern about an apartment complex in Aurora, Colorado. Is Aurora or Arvada, both suburbs of Denver. So somewhere in Denver, Colorado, there was this narrative that a Venezuelan gang called Tren de Aragua had taken over an apartment complex, and that crime was rampant in Denver. Well, I know Denver very, very well. I know the areas of town. Denver has a long history of gang violence. It has a long history of biker gangs. So claims of those were nothing new. They weren't gangs that I was familiar with, but I was interested in what the local politicians had to say. And the local residents of that building said that was a journalistic line of bullshit, and that if they had any complaints, it was about the owner of the building who was letting the building fall into disrepair, and that maybe they had some bad neighbors and some immigrant neighbors, but there was nothing of the like of this supposed gang that had taken over the building. And that was something that was also stated by the chief of police of Denver, the mayor of Denver, and the governor of Colorado. So you have to wonder why the Republican Party got so spun out of control over Tren de Aragua and its supposed spread across the nation. And I still have yet to see confirmation of them moving drugs or
Isn't Tren de Aragua the one that they said in Colorado and in Denver that's where they had taken over that apartment complex, and then there was the big flap with the mayor of Denver? Am I remembering that right, or was that a different gang?
Nope, that's absolutely it. That's absolutely it. And then supposedly, this was also piggybacked on the fears of the busing of immigrants, or the busing of illegal aliens, the flying in of illegal aliens. I'm not saying all of that didn't happen, but what I do question is the reality of Tren de Aragua. If Tren de Aragua does exist, how much of a violent or criminal gang is it? What drugs are being grown in Venezuela and transported into the United States? Don't we have larger problems with the gangs along the border in Mexico that we know are moving drugs into the United States? That we've all of a sudden pivoted away from the Zetas and some of the other gangs in Mexico to Tren de Aragua. Do we hear that much about MS-13? We hear a little bit about MS-13, but all of a sudden El Salvador is a friend in which we're exporting our prisoners and detainees to, and MS-13 is off the table, which MS-13, by the way, was not a Venezuelan or an El Salvadoran gang, but a gang that emerged in Los Angeles. And why does it emerge in Los Angeles? Well, once upon a time, when El Salvador, the regime in El Salvador was not playing games with the United States, we sanctioned them. We close off all trade to them and devastate their economy and create refugees, and refugees come to the United States and they go to Los Angeles. And in Los Angeles, they also don't have jobs, they don't have work. And have
this kind of reminds me of the whole sanctuary city discussions and things that have come up, where there's various cities within the United States that has been welcoming in people who are fleeing for various reasons. I know that in my neck of the woods in the Twin Cities, we had a large Somalian contingent that made its way here that sought refuge. So, was the original what was happening in Colorado, were they seeking asylum and then Tren de Aragua just sort of snuck in with the rest of the mix, or is there some larger narrative here about what's happening with respect to how these Venezuelans are seeking to be in the United States?
Well, there's something to Denver's self-designation as a sanctuary city, and I think it also speaks to both Colorado politics and the history of Colorado. One, Colorado has the Arkansas River, which is the former northern border of the state of northern Spain, which then became Mexico, and then the United States started a war with in the 1850s and took over all the land of northern Mexico down to the Rio Grande River. Later bought the southern half of Arizona and California with the Gadsden Purchase. But so in Colorado, if you're familiar with it, you have a sort of a distinct racial difference and historical difference for those people who, the Hispanos or the Chicanos, as some of them call themselves, who have lived in New Mexico. I mean, the entirety of the state of New Mexico also has this unique history here of the United States, of having lived under the Spanish Empire, shortly the Mexican Empire after the Mexican revolutionary or the Civil War with Spain, war for independence from Spain. So then they became the Republic of Mexico. And on the heels of that war was whenever James K. Polk and the United States government picked a war with the newly formed republics of Mexico to take over the northern part of their territory. So you have that tension that exists in Colorado of the northern half of the state and Denver being in the former French holdings, which the United States acquired with the Louisiana Purchase, and the southern half of the state being of a much different political ilk. And that
So the center of this started kind of in Colorado as a sanctuary, or Denver as a sanctuary city, and this has widened out to where Tren de Aragua, which has had this long history of dating all the way back to the Obama administration, and through lots of administrations here having tensions with Venezuela. Are we seeing things kind of coming to a head as this starts to hit more parts of the country? I mean, now we're in New Mexico. This was all stuff that was happening in Colorado and Denver. Is this a trend that we're seeing across the United States, or like, can you give us a broader context for like what we might be looking towards?
well, when you say a trend, are you talking with regards to sanctuary cities or refugees coming in from countries where the United States is trying to enforce a regime change with sanctions and by economically devastating the country? I mean,
Well,
Cuba. What's
I'm just
Cuba?
not I'm just not connecting the dots completely on like Joel Cano. He hires this or he's got these illegal immigrants working for him. He gets arrested. I'm not seeing the broader narrative here.
What?
It's hard for me to place it. He just so happens to be a magistrate. You know, he got caught up in something. He got arrested. I mean, if the Trump administration is serious about cracking down on illegal immigrants and them working in this country illegally, I mean, I'd imagine that they'd be going after meatpacking plants and all kinds of stuff. But here we are, and they're arresting some people that are working for this guy, at his house.
So one, I think like we need to understand the effects of the United States or the blowback or the kickbacks from the United States unique position as the distributor of the world's currency, and then what happens whenever we abuse that power to create economic sanctions. Well, those places that we've sanctioned or were destroying their economy, the people whose lives are being destroyed all of a sudden look to the United States and want to come here. So this is part of the reason that we have immigration in the United States. The sanctuary city aspect comes again to the interesting history of the United States and the political. Um, I mean, Denver was a very early sanctuary city. I think that comes from tensions that exist in Denver with this dual history that resides in the state, of the northern half being having sort of French and a having more having more I don't know, pioneer and American identity than the southern half of the state. And so part of what was politically expedient and part of the identity again of Denver and of Los Angeles and of other large cities that exist inside of the former Mexican colonies was a desire to create space and sanctuary for those people that their families and heritage had identity with, Mexico, and other former Spanish colonies in Central and South America. So why does Joel Cano come into the picture? I think that is in part one, because he is brought to light as a judge. The somewhat salacious narrative of, oh, he had an immigrant. You can imagine. I would imagine if we turn back, it's some reporter that gets wind of this, that leads with the story of the magistrate of Las Cruces. And Las Cruces is essentially a border town. It's even within the the 100 miles of the border that are for which the Patriot Act removed habeas corpus from the control of the state. So it's within inside the border checkpoint. He leads with a narrative of I have proof that a judge of Las Cruces is harboring an an illegal immigrant. And then for the FBI and immigration services to then turn around and and begin to investigate an American citizen from there is what I would say happened. And that they then brought them into custody over charges of tampering with evidence. And his wife on charges of conspiracy to tamper with evidence is a very, very shaky case, but also begins to speak to how little consideration is made with regards to the immigration hawks in the federal government. And you asked a great question with regards to, well, if it's one thing for immigration services to be targeting illegal aliens and people who do not have the protections of the Constitution of the United States of America, although others would argue that the Bill of Rights was setting down unalienable rights and listing rights that had nothing to do with the Constitution because they were more foundational than those of the Constitution. And those have been some of the concerns of civil libertarians and libertarians both with regards to what was happening with the flights of detainees that were taken to El Salvador earlier this year. So again, a great question as to, if the federal government, the FBI, and the other federal apparatuses are turning to begin to charge American citizens with crimes of harboring illegal immigrants or hiring illegal immigrants, you would have thought that they would have started with corporate interests rather than private citizens to begin with. And because you have this jump past, say charging meat packing plants or corporate farms or corporate restaurant chains that might be hiring a whole bunch of illegal immigrants and going after the leadership of those companies, for them to jump ahead of that queue and go after one, a private citizen, two, someone who had the respect of his municipality and the power of a judgeship is
Well,
shocking.
and it seems like he has a means to fight back. I mean, this is not your average run-of-the-mill citizen. This is somebody who ostensibly understands the law quite well, has the ability to navigate these waters. It seems weird that they would target somebody with such an ability to fight back.
Well, and part of that targeting could have been a political calculation, because not only is this somebody who has an understanding of the law and the power structure of New Mexico, but is also going to be politically connected. But if I don't know if there's any bluer state than New Mexico. And again, New Mexico has a very curious history. New Mexico was held as a territory under military rule after the Mexican-American War for 60 years. And it was held under military rule, and also the instructions to the territorial governors was to suppress all the economy of New Mexico. And why? To make New Mexico poor, so and to keep New Mexico under the thumb of the United States. And I'm not sure if you're from your area of the world familiar with narratives of the the Spanish Trail, the Santa Fe Trail, and the richness of Santa Fe and not just, well, again, northern Mexico. Although people, when I say northern Mexico, remember this goes all the way to the Arkansas and includes the states of California, etc. So the
Right, the border used to be much higher. Like we sort of annexed this big chunk of Mexico in the war and took over. Yeah, I'm familiar with it.
okay, so well, all of that area was there was a lot of envy and desire of America in leading into the 1850s to take over it. It was very rich, and think of the Grand Ranches and of California, and the trade and the high life of Santa Fe. Well, the United States intentionally economically suppressed northern Mexico, and California has reemerged in the wake of the film industry, but also what was in Northern California. It was moving the jet propulsion labs and the research agencies of the federal government for our defense departments. But even in New Mexico, who's the chief employer of New Mexico today? Las Cruces Laboratories. And why was New Mexico an empty, deserted wasteland in the 40s, whenever Oppenheimer and the Manhattan Project needed a place to turn to without a lot of attention? Well, that was only 20 years after the end of the economic suppression of New Mexico. So that's had lasting effects. I hear so often in New Mexico, like, why are our schools behind? Why are we economically behind? And I'm like, well, it was the policy of the United States for 60 years. And after a devastating war in New Mexico, to perpetuate that dependency. So that maybe immigration services targeted New Mexico, again, might be an intentional selection by the Republican administration in power today because of the strong Democratic alliance of New Mexico. Even go back to the Biden administration and look at the number of New Mexicans who were part of that administration, because not only is New Mexico a state unto itself, but there are, I believe, 26 independent reservations who are sovereign from the state of New Mexico and have agreements with the federal government of the United States and receive both federal monies. But in some ways, we think of these reservations as being a part of the state in which they reside, but they are sovereign from the state in which they reside. So part of the relationship of New Mexico, or the strong relationship between New Mexico and the federal government, is also part of the relationship between the Department of Indian Affairs and other federal agencies and the 26 governments of the tribes within New Mexico.
Fascinating. Well, I mean, it certainly does tie together a lot of stuff that has been percolating, things that we've discussed on the show. I believe we actually did a couple of things where we were seeing Tren de Aragua gang members getting deported on their knees. And so now to see this magistrate judge get swept up in this, it seems like an interesting development. I'm not sure I'm as convinced that this is some sort of targeted selection of an individual that is going to break this thing open, rather than it feels like some kind of random happenstance. But I guess we'll have to see which way it ends up going, because it kind of feels like maybe this was just some guy that got swept up and they didn't really realize who they were getting. But maybe there's some grander plan here.
I lean more often towards ignorance in the execution of the actions of especially the independent agencies. But
there's got to be a corollary here. There's never ascribed to malfeasance what you can ascribe to incompetence. It's got to be something similar here. There were, never ascribe some grand plan to what's just happenstance. It's like this seems pretty random.
I certainly believe in that to a large part, but we also need to understand that we have set up the circumstances that have led to both the ignorance and the facts as they lie to lead into this. And I think it's very important for Americans to begin to, there's a question as to why all of the immigration in Europe and in the United States. Well, whenever we control other people's economies, I think this is very important. And also to for Americans to begin to understand the degree of interference that the United States is exerting on the country of Venezuela, I don't know that many Americans would support that. And I'd bring up two names of the supposed replacements for Nicolás Maduro that the United States has championed in the last two elections. One is Juan Guaido, and the other is Maria Machado. And so it's certainly the degree of the United States interference with those elections is provable in all sorts of ways. But then if we turn again to the narrative and the concerns of our elections here in the United States, it's interesting that our fears are being confirmed by the actions of the United States on other countries. So when we talk about election interference and lawfare in the United States, and also the economic meddling of China, well, these are projections of the policies. These are internal projections of the policies that America has been exerting on other countries of the world. And so it's we should understand that our fear is well founded because we've been practicing it for quite some time.
Part of the statecraft. We do it to other people. Russia does it to us. It's part and parcel for how the game of politics is played. But I think it's interesting to consider these things and whether Venezuela is a partner that the United States is going to try to turn to if things in the Middle East sour. It's actually the first time I've heard the name Juan Guaido. I think I got the right guy on the screen. It's interesting to see if Wikipedia is actually being used as a propaganda tool for the United States State Department. I wonder who wrote this article particularly. It's a pretty good picture of him there.
I guarantee you that the State Department has been very interested in what the public knows about Juan Guaido. But remember, in the last Venezuelan election, even though the international
which the U.S. called undemocratic, right? They call
yes.
they cast aspersions upon the results of the election. They said this is not right.
Yes, despite the presence of international auditors of that election who said that it was done fairly. So the United States said that it was erroneous, and Juan Guaido had been. I forget why they couldn't seat Juan Guaido in that election, but instead they turned to Maria Machado, whatever. So yes, interesting things going on there. It also wasn't lost upon me that in the last year, Chevron moved its base of operations from California to Texas. And when they moved from California to Texas, there was all these claims of, they have taken a page out of Elon Musk's anti-California, anti-DEI initiative. And I thought to myself, no, they want to be closer to Venezuela. And they are probably encouraged to move their base of operations to Houston because it's only across of a gulf of a body of water from where ostensibly they might be engaging in a lot of oil extraction in the next coming years. So, you want to get your supplies there before you turn your soldiers there, I think is the Chinese proverb. But anyway, I don't have anything else apart from, again, the concerns also about the desecration of the civil liberties of not just humans and these unalienable rights, but also the ostensible protections of the Constitution and our legal protection as citizens seem to have faded away as the FBI and immigration have targeted an American citizen. So things to watch out for.
We'll keep an eye on it, and we'll see you next time on FOMO.